So last Tuesday on Geoscope, a new story had basically just broken before we went to live, shall we say? So before we went to air, but before we went live. But I think it is well worth sort of picking back up on this and covering it more. What's going on? Because honestly, what it feels like is since 2016 and our own almost shall we say right wing uh, renaissance that sort of happened and then very now quickly deflated, and we've now got a sensible government back in charge. Um, does feel like that a lot of countries are going through this cycle of they need to have like these right wing idiots in charge. I was gonna use a far stronger word there. But yeah, you've got to have sort of almost these right wing idiots in charge for everyone to be able to see, oh, actually, these people haven't got a goddamn idea what they're talking about when it comes to, uh, you know, really solving the issues of immigration, the economy, and anything that is really sort of, facing our country, the problems that we are having. And it has almost felt you've seen this in Poland, you've seen it in the UK, America. Obviously, I think there's going to be some very significant moves by the Republican parties to maybe oust Trump, but that's we'll see what happens post-election in November. What happens there? Um, but it really does seem that, especially in the UK, all those very right-wing voices that had very prominent places at one time, since they've lost their MPs and seats, almost gone and disappeared in many of the ways. Farage might be in Parliament, but he isn't being treated as this brand new heroic savior, and nor are his constituents in Clacton overly enthused that he has actually won. In fact, they're now realizing he doesn't really give a damn about us. So, what does that say then for the future of reform in the UK? But like I say, we're talking about Germany here at the moment, and it does seem that not only Germany and France may about to be going through their own decade of well far right lunacy. I'm sorry, guys, but it does really look like it at this moment in time. But hang on there, and don't worry, we are here. We will, support you through it. Like I say, we've been here, done that, got the t-shirt in this country. Uh, but yeah, let's have a look what's going on in Germany at the moment, and just what's going on here, because this really does sort of undermine a lot of the European project currently at the moment. So before we do get on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the Foundation link, or Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. Also, click the like, click the share button. If you are new, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell as well. Give it a ding ding a ling. And of course, on we go into this. This coming from The Guardian. Germany's border clampdown threatens the entire European project. So, the far right across Europe used to dream of seeing their countries leave the European Union. In France, it was called Frexit. In Germany, it was Dexit. But recently, these calls have quietened. The reason is not that the far right parties have become enamored now with the EU, but rather they understand that instead of quitting, they can reshape the EU into a collection of strong nation states that will each now enact their own right-wing anti-migration agenda. As Jordan Bellada, the president of the National Rally in France, recently remarked, explaining why his party no longer called for France to quit the EU, he said, "You do not leave the table when you are winning the game." And like I say, it's not just in these individual countries, it's these people will put people into the EU Parliament as well. So there's a lot more at stake here as well. Remember, as we said many, many times before, France and Germany are big players when it comes to the EU. So there's no balancer, remember, anymore. There's no balancer anymore. When we were in, people are hoping that maybe Poland might become the new balancer to help balance these things out. People are hoping that maybe the Nordic countries will be a big sort of become that. We'll see what happens. But we'll see. Like I say, I guys, I know we've been through this over here. It looks like you guys are about to go through it as well. So the far right, of course, is now being allowed to, quote, win the game is now abundantly clear in Germany, where the government coalition has now announced a systemic border controls, which will now come into force on the 16th of September. This will be tighter checks for all Germany's 9 land borders, and there is now an attempt by the government to curb immigration by preventing people, especially asylum seekers, who have already crossed from other EU states from entering Germany. This now opens the way for serious human rights violations and racial profiling. German Council for Migration does warn that these plans risk violating EU law. The border checks, of course, are due to be taking place for initial 6 months, and they were announced amid a very febrile debate on what the leader of the conservative opposition, the Christian Democratic Union, called a, quote, national emergency after a Syrian asylum seeker who, under the EU asylum regulations, should have been returned from Germany to Bulgaria. He was now charged with a fatal killing in Schlofgen since the far-right anti-immigration Alternative for Deutschland, with the ADF's electoral success in Thuringia and Saxony on September showed the debate had now reached a boiling point. The German government is now on a dangerous path. The country holds a central position in the EU and its largest economy, meaning that this plan, which goes against one of the central tenets of the EU, threatens now to undermine the European project. As we said before, Germany, very important country when it comes to the EU. If they do this, if they get away with this, there will be consequences for what this means to the EU, its unity, how this shakes down. So this will be a very, very important test to see what happens on this. So a cornerstone of this project was the very ambition to make national borders disappear by creating a passport-free Schengen area, which now includes 25 of the 27 member states. It was one of the reasons why the EU received the Nobel Prize back in 2012. Although then, thousands of migrants were then dying at the EU's external borders every year. At that time, representatives of the Union declared over the past 60 years, the European project has shown that it's possible for peoples of nations to come together, to cross all together across borders, that it is even possible to overcome the differences between them and us. Again, what a difference, it makes. It's been almost 12 years since 2012, and just think how things have radically changed, honestly, in that time since then. But we'll see. Like I say, it's a massive challenge. Do not underestimate this. This is a massive challenge, and how this shakes out for the EU is going to be very, very, I think, important. So it is no wonder then that the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk recently and publicly criticized Germany's unilateral plan as a complete systemic suspension of Schengen and a contravention of European law. Austria has also said that it is not prepared to receive any more migrants turned back from the border with Germany, and other countries are now likely to concur. So, once again, the issue of immigration coming up, being the big dividing line on this. How this ends up being solved, we don't know. But this is a very, very, very big problem on this. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also claimed on Wednesday that the government had already achieved a great turnaround in reducing irregular migration. Once again, you see that language coming in, irregular migration. You once again see the language of the far right changing and morphing to sort of try and become more palatable in the minds of people. Oh, it's not illegal migration we're against, it's just irregular migration. See, we're not against all migrants, just these irregular ones. You see, once again, how language becomes very dangerous, very dangerous. Um, but anyway, it continues. But Schultz's plan does also risk now causing a chain reaction throughout Europe. And this is where it could become very, very worrying very quickly. Um, so this could now lead to the unraveling of the post-national idea in itself. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders, the leader of the far-right Freedom Party, which is now part of the government, has already asked, quote, if Germany can do it, why can't we? Saying, as far as I'm concerned, the sooner the better. So it is very, very worrying to see this development. But it does feel like a lot of these countries that put off, as we saw in like 2016, these far right victories, they now seem to be coming into these countries. It does seem that once again they're going to take over, probably for a period of time, but eventually, like all these far right governments that we've seen time and time again, eventually they fail, and people realize, oh, actually, these people are idiots. They had no idea what they were on about, what they were talking about. They've been really bad for our country. Time to get rid of them. And then, of course, it takes a long time to undo the damage. Poland and what's going on with Donald Tusk, perfect example. All the stuff that they are having to undo from that. So other parties, of course, on the far right are now celebrating. By caving now to an anti-immigration sentiment, now supposedly the centrist politician parties are doing the far right's bidding. They are legitimizing its vision of a Europe with now hardening borders. It is to no great surprise, of course, that Hungary's authoritarian leader, Viktor Orban, congratulated Schulz, tweeting, "Welcome to the club, #StopMigration." Germany's asylum statistics do show the number of asylum applications is actually decreasing this year. However, the three parties of the ruling coalition want to regain a lost electoral support by joining with the far right and the center right. Both the ADF and the CDU are now aggressively pushing for very repressive migration policies. Police chiefs have said that many that do lack the capacity to actually carry out these new border checks. But whether Germany can actually control its over 370 kilometers of frontiers is beside the point. By seeking to pass the measures ahead of a third state election in Brandenburg on the 22nd of September, the coalition is now signaling to voters that it is prepared to act decisively to address what CDU leaders have hyperbolically called a loss of control at the Germany's borders. Once again, it was not a loss of control at all. Once again, this is typical far right language we've seen imported from America. Oh, you've lost control at the border. When we've already been said it right there. Statistics, asylum applications decreasing. you know? Anyway, it is now, of course, the German government's belief that trying to tackle migration and trying to regain electoral support by ramping up its border controls is misguided. The truth is, migration will continue in a world that fails to address the reasons why people flee their countries: war and conflict, political persecution and oppression, climate catastrophe, and unsustainable forms of resource exploitation. Something, again, we all really need to address. But until we really address these, the problem of migration will never 100% go away or ever be solved. Those are the real causes of migration. And hey, if people want to come here, guess what? Migrants economically valuable to countries. Countries that have, that want to come here. It's an economic advantage to us, believe it or not. But a lot of people don't want to admit that. But there you go. So then let's finish this off. So besides, of course, stoking up racial sentiment in society and undermining the rights of vulnerable groups, the German government now risks putting the EU itself in jeopardy. The very idea of a political community that enshrines the right of free movement across borders is crumbling right before our eyes, and it is not migrants who are to blame. So, yeah, I think honestly this situation is quite worrying. We'll see what happens. If this results in a legal challenge by another country, it says, "Hey, what you were doing is here," puts on that, The other worrying thing is then what if, like, Hungary follows suit? Maybe another country decides to sort of do the same, follow Germany's example. Like I say, Germany's a very powerful, influential country in the EU. Kind of a problem if it itself decides, well, we're just going to ignore, Schengen for the time being, harden our borders. This is I think, a significant challenge for the EU. Not just the EU, but for Germany, for France, and for a lot of these countries that have seen the rise of these far right parties that are on the cusp, in some places, in power. Like I say, next year, big election year for Germany, and worries me beyond compare. You might see the ADF get a modicum of power, and that does and should be worrying a lot of people in Germany, because I've said before, look at all these other countries. We've been through this. We sort of know what happens. You go through a series of idiots trying to blame migrants, and then eventually the rest of your population starts to catch on. Oh, these people are idiots. They don't really know. But of course, by the time they figure that out, there's a lot of damage that gets done that you have to then, undo. But again, unfortunately, that's politics, that's democracy, that's what we live in. And of course, something else you have to protect while those types of people are in, because ultimately they will go after democracy to try and make sure that they stay in a little bit longer. Look at Viktor Orban; he's done that as well. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. I think this could be bit of a problem the EU has to deal with. We'll see how they end up tackling this issue, whether it comes, to some sort of court case. Maybe you'll hear Ursula von der Leyen sort of step in, something like that. But it is when you've got the EU and as a core concept of freedom of movement, and yet Germany's undermining it. Probably one of the if not the most important political economic countries in the EU. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on this, of course. But of course, as always, until then, click the like, click the share button, subscribe if you aren't already, leave a comment down below. And of course, as always, let me know what you think. Again, down below. I've already said that. But anyway, repeating myself, I've caught myself in a loop. As of course, we'll see you all next time.